glad you asked that. And
the question, please.
the question was, I'm going to generalize it from LEED to how sustainable were we able to do all of this work. It's a great question, and there's a great story. So, and I'll get to it very shortly.
Okay. Another question.
Sure.
Where are the stairs?
There's a stair connection down here, which is a new stair here that will provide access from the second level down. There's some stairs here that are exit stairs from the third floor up that come down here and then exit out. There's a historic stair. I believe some of you probably went up the historic stair. It's in this location here. This is unfortunately another element that we don't have the funds available to restore it properly today. So rather than try and maybe not do it completely, we are going to have it as part of an area that will sort of archive it we'll wall it in and allow it to be preserved in the state that it's in today, so that when the funds do become available, we can make that connection. And perhaps when the third floor gets a tenant to lease the entire floor, it would be a terrific time to look at restoring that stair connection. As you might imagine, we've had to make a number of decisions about how we would appropriately spend the funds that we have to have the greatest impact. And so there are some areas that we've had to push off into the future phases, or consider for future phases. I don't know if any of you went into the vaults that were on the second floor. I think it's really interesting to think about a train station not as kind of rail transit and, you know, who rides trains anyway. We're in the jet age, right? But if you think of trains at the turn of the century, they were the jets at the time. This was how most information came and went from the city of Seattle. So if you were moving money, the telegraph was located in this building, things like that. So information, this was the information superhighway. And so the vaults that were here contained all the valuables that were coming and going from Seattle at one time or another. We've repurposed them into the men's and women's restrooms on the second and third floor. But it's really interesting to think of the train station in a different way than maybe we think of it today. And the third floor, I think, as Trina mentioned, really is largely preserved for a tenant space, and it could be multiple office tenants or a single large tenant. Again, here's that stair connection that you came up, and here's the little stair that you went up to get up to the tower. Those of you that were brave enough to go up all the way to the top. Most everyone. So the other issue of sustainability, we were really, from the very beginning, this SDOT and Trevina brought a very strong desire to think very creatively about how we would make this a sustainable project. And creating sustainable projects out of historic buildings is a particularly interesting challenge, I think, in a number of ways. In many ways, this building was designed very sustainably from the beginning. It had natural ventilation in the main waiting room. There was no air conditioning. It had operable windows. And so in many ways, we have to just relearn the way that buildings were built before to make that sustainable yet again today. So I'll get into the details, but we are installing a geothermal well field to provide the heat and cooling for the building. We are naturally ventilating the main waiting room space, which is virtually a huge portion of the first floor of the building. Now, I mentioned LEED Silver as a minimum target. That was the target. We're well in advance of that today, I'm happy to report. In fact, the geothermal well field will be installed beneath. When we remove the Jackson Street structure, we would then be able, and we're removing the slab beneath as well, we'll be able to install the wells under what would be the Jackson Street Plaza, but at the King Street level, within the footprint of the building, because we'll have the derricks will be able to get in within the footprint of the building and install them. Yes?
Can you give about a 3-sentence description of a geothermal well field?
Sure.
Yeah.
Only three sentences.
3 sentences. Okay.
It's a bunch of letters.
The Earth is, once you dig down far enough, is at a constant temperature. Well, and it gets warmer as you go deeper, but within the first several hundred feet, it's a very predictable, constant temperature year-round in the mid-50s. It becomes an incredible source of heat when it's colder than 55, and it becomes an incredible source of cooling when you can exhaust heat into the ground. And so we use heat pumps, in this case, in this building, to transfer what is otherwise a heat sink. We make a large heat sink beneath the building by using wells that are 300 feet deep, and there's water that we circulate through the system. Sometimes there's some antifreeze in it, but there's a mix of a liquid that is circulated through these wells, and there'll be dozens of the wells that we'll use, and they provide, again, the heat and the cooling for the building.
Thank you.
And that's what's illustrated by the red vertical lines in this location, and these are the heat pumps that will then distribute it throughout the building. And we've sized the well field to be sufficient for what we hope is the entire building, but depending on the demand, the cooling demand of a tenant that might be up at a part of the building, we have methods for supplementing if it's not sufficient. But we feel confident it will do the vast majority of the building. We use in the main lobby space, that double height space, we reactivate the windows that were there historically. We'll have mechanical operators so that when the building will tell the windows when to open and close. They were manual in 1909 or in 1906. And then we have unit ventilators, which are very similar to the radiators that were there historically as well. But so there'll be the scheme, the way we treat this is very similar to the way it was done before. Just the source of our heating and cooling isn't a furnace; it's the ground in this case, and the heat pump system. In addition to that, most of the light fixtures that we see, both the historic light fixtures and other light fixtures, we're going to use LEDs, and they will provide an extremely efficient way to illuminate the building. Here's a graphic of where the well field will be located beneath the building. And this is essentially the area beneath the Jackson Street Plaza area. I have this historic picture here only to illustrate that here are the operable windows, and you can see that they pivot in the middle, and we'll be actuating those, where they'll have electric motors that actuate them so that they will provide the ventilation. Part and parcel of this is that we recognize that in a train station, when you're coming and going, you'll be wearing your flip-flops and shorts in the summer, and you'll have your coat on in the winter. And so we don't have to keep it 70 degrees 24/7. We can allow the temperature to go up and down a little bit more because of the transient nature of a train station. I'm wondering, one thing I did want to point out, on the sustainability side, I think I'm extremely proud that this building, in LEED, it's getting every one of the LEED points for energy, and I've never been involved in a project where we've achieved every one of them. I don't know if you all are familiar with the LEED rating system, but it's a really terrific thing to be able to say that. And you can see that we're actually, it's around the corner here, I think it says 89% of the energy use. We're reducing the energy consumption versus today by 89% over where it was before. So it's, for you that know the KBTU kind of language, we're at 327 today, and we're projecting that we'll have 36 KBTUs of energy or use in the future. So it's, from a heat standpoint, it's a pretty impressive target. And the well field is really a significant player in achieving that goal. We are meeting the 2030 challenge already with the building, which is a terrific goal to have as well, and we're tracking very solidly as LEED Gold. And in fact, Platinum is not out of reach. It just depended on a number of things actually
Tim, would
being
you
possible.
explain briefly about the 2030 challenge, please?